We'll all be speaking Chinese soon. All right, so I was watching, let me show you what I'm talking about. In this video, with Robert Bryce and a professor from Finland, I think his name is Simon Mikau or something like that, mining engineer, professor from Finland, talk about Chinese 2050 master plan. And I'm a huge fan of Robert Bryce, by the way. In fact, I got his book right here, Power Hungry, and I subscribe to him on Substack, as you should as well. Just a guy crushes, dude. This is freaking fantastic. And the reason I was very interested in this is because Robert's talking about how AI in about 10 years will be 40% of the electricity demand. All right, AI, 40%. That's how much the server farms all that require. And it's no one's prepared for this, and it's not. So you can't have. Anyway, I'm not going to. You can't have the electricity demand go that high and on solar panels and wind. It's simply impossibility. In fact, Vaclav Smil, whatever his name is, Smil or something like that, he talks about the insanity of the net zero stuff. It's just stupid. But anyway, so I was listening to this and I was kind of disappointed because this guy right here was talking about how Chinese can commit the capital to mine. It's an interesting take about copper. The refinement of copper, the quality of the copper in the ground is getting lower and lower and lower, which takes more mining, which of course takes more fossil fuels to do all this and everything. It's getting less and less just good quality copper, which means we have to go deeper, we have to dig more and more and more. And he's saying most companies in capitalistic America don't want to wait the time to turn a profit on this. Whereas China, on the other hand, because they're commie, they can commit large amounts of money and wait out in terms of until the profits come in, essentially. And I said, man, I've heard this before. So check this out. Check this out. Right here. Here's Paul Samuelson. All right. And he's a Nobel Prize in economics who has written the most. If you've gone to economics class, you most likely had read Paul Samuelson. All right. And it's just in 1989, the 1989 edition of his book about economics, Samuelson and William Nordhaus, I don't know who that is. The Soviet economy is proof that contrary to what many skeptics had earlier believed, a socialist command economy can function and even thrive. And right here, Samuelson habitually overestimated Soviet growth, edition after edition. They got this forecast right here of what he did. What we find is repeatedly overconfidence in the potential for Soviet growth and an asymmetric response to the forecast errors. Under communism, the Poles are fond of saying the only future is certain, the past is always changing. I think it's pretty fun. This has always had this like appreciation for the dominance of communism because they don't have the profit motive, they don't have the quarterly earnings report and all that. And so then it come across me here. I'm reading this letter right here, the Reed lecture article, and I read this we talked about this last night on the Locals live stream. If you're not on my Locals channel, you should. The two cultures. I just want to read you this guy right here, CP Snow. I never heard of him until I came across this, but he sounds like a great guy. I'm sure he's dead now, but he sounds like a great guy in terms he writes. He's very scientific. I think he was like an organic chemist or something like that. And on top of that, he's an author of fiction novels, which I'm very much looking forward to reading, by the way. But he also falls for the idea of the communist domination. Watch. Here he is in the UK. He's saying our population is small by comparison to either the US or the USSR. If we compare like with like and put scientists and engineers together, we are training at a professional level per head of the population, one Englishman to every 1.5 Americans and to every 2.5 Russians. So you hear what he's saying. So they're basically, the Russians have 2.5 engineers and scientists to every 1 Englishman. And we Americans only have 1.5 scientists and engineer compared to 1 Englishman. All right. Compared to 2.5 Russians. With some qualifications, I believe the Russians have judged this situation sensibly. They have a deeper insight to scientific revolution than we have, or than the Americans have. The gap between the cultures doesn't seem to be anything like so wide as with us. If one reads contemporary Soviet novels, for example, Soviet novels, one finds that their novelists can assume in their audience, as we cannot, at least a rudimentary acquaintance with an industry is what an industry is all about, talking about engineering. So he's saying if you write a novel in the Soviet Union, you're going to have some, your audience will at least know what engineering is, where the UK and also too in the Americas, we don't, right? Let's see. Pure science doesn't often come in the Soviet Union, and they don't appear much happier with it than literary intellectuals here. But engineering does come into the USSR. So USSR is big on engineering. An engineer in a Soviet novel is acceptable, so it's seen as acceptable as a psychiatrist in an American novel. It's very interesting. The Russians have judged what kind and number of educated men and women a country needs to come out on top in the scientific revolution. I'm going to oversimplify, but their estimate, and I believe it's pretty near right, is that this. First of all, as many Alpha Plus scientists as the country can throw up. No country has many of them, provided that the schools and universities are there. It doesn't matter what you teach them. We probably have at least as many pro rata as the Russians. That is at least our worries. Because they're basically saying the Russians are putting out more and they're teaching them more rigorously than UK, because the UK is all about the literature. The Russians are all about the science. It's crazy. So check this out. As the scientific revolution goes on, the call for these men will be something we haven't imagined, though the Russians have. They will require thousands upon thousands, and they'll need all the human development that the university education can give them. A very negative view of England, of the West generally, and then the UK in particular. He says, I can't help thinking of the Venetian Republic in their last half century. Like us, they had once been fabulously lucky. They had become rich, as we did, by accident. They had acquired immense political skill, just as we have. A good many of them were tough-minded, realistic, patriotic men. They knew, just as clearly as we know, that the current of history had begun to flow against them. Many of them gave their minds to working out ways to keep going. It would have meant breaking the pattern to which they had crystallized. They were fond of the pattern just as we are fond of ours, but they never found the will to break it, unlike the Russians, because the Russians are teaching the science and all this, the engineering, specifically the engineering. He says engineering is the way to go, not science specifically. It's not science, engineering specifically. And Americans were very big on science, but not as big as engineering. And the Russians were very big on engineering. And where the UK was very big on like literature. They'd gotten around mathematics and stuff and just really focused on like literature and stuff. Not all the time, they're still scientists and stuff. That's what he's talking about. All right. Check this out. I do comfort myself that the Americans are much more like us between 1850 and 1914. Whatever they don't do, at least they react. It's going to take them a long and violent pull to be as well prepared for the scientific revolution as the Russians are, but there's a good chance they will do it. Here's where the mistake is made. The scientific revolution on the world scale needs first and foremost capital. Capital in all forms, including capital machinery. The poor countries, until they've got beyond a certain point on the industrial curve, cannot accumulate that capital. That is why the gap between the rich and poor countries is widening. The capital must come from the outside. And there are only two possible sources for that. One is the West, which means the US, or the other is the USSR. Interesting. The second requirement after capital, as important as capital, is men. That is, trained scientists and engineers adaptable enough to devote themselves to a foreign country's industrialization for at least 10 years of their life. The Russians here have a clear edge. That is where their educational policy has already paid big dividends. They have such men to spare as they are needed. We just don't in the UK, and the Americans aren't much better off. For I don't know how we can do what we need to do in the West, or whether we shall do anything. All that I do know is that if we don't, the communist countries will. They will do it at great cost to themselves and others, but they will do it. And if that's how it turns out, we shall have failed both practically and morally. Yeah, see what he's saying? At best, the West will become an enclave in a different world, and this country will be an enclave in an enclave. Are we resigning ourselves to that? History is merciless to failure. In any case, if that happens, we shall not be writing the history. Anyway, so it's a very kind of depressing look at what he thinks the future of the West is relative to the communists. And yet, guess what? The communist empire fell. Now, I get it. China's a fascist government. I mean, it's not a communist. It's just not. It's fascistic. It's, everything for the government. It's corporate. You know what? I hope you understand what fascist means, actually. Do you know what it means? A bunch of sticks tied together. That's an Italian word for tying sticks together. Like the rope is stronger with all the threads that can combine as just one. That's what a fascist means. And that's what Mussolini said. That was his party, the fascist party. We're going to tie all these sticks together. Let me show you what I'm talking about. This goes back to Rome, actually. Interesting. See how they got the sticks tied together and they got the axe right there? Lots of that stuff. It's very historic. Lots of history in behind the fascist logo. And it's very, very interesting. You should look into it. That's exactly what the fascist is. And that's the fasci party. I don't know how they say it in Italian. But anyway, so Mussolini said everything for the government, nothing, everything for the state, nothing outside the state. But it's corporatism is what he wanted. That's exactly what China has. China has corporatism. Again, at the end of the day, you got the leaders, the Mussolinis of the world, who were in charge of everything, but all based on corporatism for sure. And that can work in some regard, but at the end of the day, you still have to have entrepreneurship. You still have to have people who have the cunning, the desire, the skill set, the motivation to try to make a buck because they see inefficiencies. And that's where real capitalism, actually entrepreneurship, can come to play. But I mean, we've heard this all the time. We say, oh man, these communist countries, they can wait out because they don't have to appeal to shareholders. They don't have to appeal to the general public. This is what Thomas Friedman said in The World is Flat kind of thing. Like, oh man, the economy, the communists, they're going to they're going to outplay us because they don't have the same short-term time frame as we do. They've been saying this for decades. Now, at some point, they're going to be right. But we've heard this before and before and before the Russians. We've heard it before and before the commies. They're Chinese. And it's just not happening. It's not. Especially with China, with all their street smarts in terms of science and engineering stuff, they still steal all of our stuff, dude. They're thieving all of our stuff like crazy. Our intellectual property. They're not creating their own. They're taking ours, man. And this is so. Where's all their freaking dynamic engineers and scientists? Well, they're stealing our stuff. So we've heard this 1,000 times. Like, oh, China, blah 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 blah. You know, look, I get it. I like steel tariffs and all that, 100%, man. I wish we had produced more steel. Wish we produced more mining. I wish all that stuff. At the end of the day, though, we've heard this before with the Russians. And it's again, I'm not saying Joe Biden's he's a horrible president. This guy sucks, dude. I mean, he's a freaking perv, you know, but America isn't Joe Biden. America's not Trump either. America is still putting out these scientists, these engineers, these guys who are capable of bringing the capital to develop an idea, to take it to the market, make tons of money. And another guy, after a while, says that guy isn't doing it very efficiently. I'm going to do the same thing. Like, I don't know. I don't know how you still can't be optimistic on America. I look at my kids' generation. The generation after mine, I'm Gen X. I don't know what the generation after mine is. I have no clue. I don't know what it is. They seem weak, generally speaking. I'm not going to lie to you. I mean, they're just they're the ones who took the, let's just call it the J to the A to the B and the CDC, all that stuff. They took that hook, line, and sinker. They didn't challenge that at all. They just said, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Can I have another? Yes, sir. Can I have another? The generation behind them, though, I don't think they're the same thing. I think these are crushers, man. Crushers. I think these guys are coming up and they're like freaking, they're ready to make it work. They're not worried about offending people. They're not worried. They're just like, get out of the way. I'm getting ready to crush. I just, again, I might be wrong, but my intuition, seemed from because I got 4 kids in that generation. Independent minded. They're sick of being, talked to, preached to, the whole thing. That doesn't mean they're not woke. They are woke in a lot of regards, but they're just like, nah, I'm freaking out here to crush. I got good feelings about America. I just don't think this whole thing about communism taking over. I just think we've heard this time and again, and I just think they're wrong. At the end of the day, entrepreneurship is what leads the world, man. And we have entrepreneurship in just droves because most Americans still believe in small business and small business with the capital markets combined. Entrepreneurship with the capital markets, because like CP Snow says, you've got to have capital. That's freaking intellectual capital, personal capital, and actually money to expand on your business. Hey, love your thoughts. God bless. We'll see you.